After a 5-month-long pause, nuclear talks with Iran resumed in Vienna this week. The United States participated indirectly. Iran says several preconditions must be met before it agrees to hold direct negotiations with the U.S. So how likely is it that the 2015 Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, that agreement, may be salvaged? Or is it back to the drawing board? Well, joining us to share some insights is Gregg Roman, director of the Middle East Forum. Greg, it's always good to talk with you. So the initial round of resumed talks in Vienna have concluded. Are you optimistic or pessimistic about renewed efforts to finally get Iran to back off from developing a nuclear weapon?
I'm extremely pessimistic about the results of the European broker talks in Vienna. On day one of the negotiations, which started this past Monday, we saw that Iran was asking for immediate lifting of all Western sanctions, specifically American sanctions against Iran, in exchange for almost nothing. And the scenario we're looking at right now is that Iran is going to get better caps on their nuclear program for almost complete relief from the West, which I would deem a complete loss for our efforts to limit their nuclear program.
And Iran isn't allowing visual monitoring of any of its nuclear development sites, and the government has stockpiled 16 times the enriched uranium levels that are allowed under the 2015 JCPOA. Also, the Islamic Republic admits it now is producing uranium metal. That's only needed for building a nuclear bomb, so not for peaceful purposes. So what do you make of those actions?
I think they're on the threshold of a nuclear weapon breakout capability, where beforehand it may have been a year. Now they could probably develop an improvised weapon within a month. And in doing so, the IAEA keeps on reporting on the increase in their enriched uranium stockpiles at an ever-growing level, which brings them closer to that breakout capability. And I think once the Iranians get it, it's not just going to be located in a centralized nuclear site like Isfahan, Shiraz, the Bashir nuclear reactor. They have their program divided between hundreds of different sites. And those are the sites that we know about. So as they increase their production and the West keeps on quibbling and basically dribbling over their negotiations team in Vienna, Iran is on the precipice of a nuclear weapon. And I think that once they get it, they're not going to go back out of that Pandora's box.
And you don't really believe they're going to reverse course. You believe that they are determined to have a nuclear weapon, aren't you?
I believe that they're determined to have the capability to develop a nuclear weapon in a very short time frame. Whether they develop one and don't test it, whether they feel like they get to the point where they have to test it as a sign to the West, I really think that Iran right now on its nuclear program is seeing it as the only card it has to play in terms of being able to get sanctions relief. They've tried attacking Gulf shipping. They've tried to escalate the war in Yemen. They even tried to carry out a terror attack against Israeli targets in New Delhi. There was another attempt in the Philippines. There was another attempt in Colombia. But all of that hasn't worked. So right now, if they don't get what they want in Vienna, they're going to be on that path to the weapon.
Okay, now you had mentioned the sanctions. Iran wants the U.S. to unfreeze about $10 billion in assets, also guarantees from the U.S. that it won't impose or restore sanctions or withdraw from the nuclear deal again. So should the Biden administration agree to any of those demands, how could they guarantee that the U.S. wouldn't withdraw again? I mean, what if Trump or another president that shares Trump's views wins the White House in the future?
I think that the approach to the Iran nuclear negotiations is a binary issue. Sanctions relief for putting a freeze on the nuclear program is the wrong approach. If the United States wants to have a successful negotiation, they will raise all of the issues of Iran's malign activities in the Middle East, including their nuclear program, but not limited to their ballistic missile capability, not limited to their support of non-state actors, which are agitating against American allies, and their sponsorship of different regimes, whether it be Yemen, whether it be Syria, whether it be their other activities where they're trying to cater influence, especially in Iraq now after the attempted assassination of the Iraqi prime minister. And if the U.S. brings all of those cards, that each of those issues are addressed, that might be enough to permit sanctions relief.
Okay, now Israel warns it won't hesitate to destroy Iranian nuclear reactors if necessary, just like they did years ago in Iraq and Syria. We all know that Iran has said it wants to destroy Israel. Israel says it won't allow Iran to catch the world by surprise with a nuclear weapon like Kim Jong-un did in North Korea. So give us a prediction, Greg, on these talks. How likely is it that Iran will reverse course, or do you think Israel will be forced to take unilateral military action?
I think Iran is in the position of power right now, externally, where they're able to have all the cards as it relates to their nuclear program in Vienna. But Israel has a plan B rather than just carrying out an attack on Iran's nuclear installations. You can destroy something, but you can also build something. One thing that's irreversible in Iran is the existential crisis that they're facing with their water management issues, the ability for them to have national infrastructure systems which are consistently under cyber attack, and more than anything, a population that day by day keeps on revolting against the regime. So if you're looking for a successful solution here for a long-term problem, or excuse me, for a long-term solution to Iran's nuclear program, it starts in Iran, not in the US, not in Vienna, and not in Jerusalem. Beyond that, you'll have a tit-for-tat attack. The Iranians will build again, the Israelis will destroy. And until you have regime change in Iran, that's the only way you'll get a finite end to the nuclear program.
Okay, that's what it's all about. We'll see what develops. Gregg Roman, director of the Middle East Forum. Thank you, Greg, for sharing your time and insights with us.
Thank you, Gary.